with that, I will now introduce Laura Jones. She's our Executive Vice President and Chief Strategic Officer. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Alexa, and good morning or good afternoon, depending on what part of the country you're in. Thank you for joining us. Many of you have been joining us for a number of weeks now. This is our 34th weekly COVID webinar. Some of you are new today, so welcome to our new participants as well. My name is Laura Jones. I'm the Executive Vice President at CFIB, which means I do a little bit of everything, including working with our legislative teams, our research teams, and our communications teams. And I'm joined by some wonderful and very capable colleagues today. Corinne Pullman, who is our Senior Vice President of National Affairs and Partnerships. So Corinne, do you want to just briefly introduce yourself?
Sure. So as Laura said, I am Senior VP National Affairs and Partnerships, so I'm responsible for our federal work, so everything to do with Parliament Hill and in Ottawa, as well as I oversee all the savings programs that hopefully many of you are taking advantage of.
That's great. And we've also got Rachel and Brendan with us today. So usually we have one or the other. We have them both on the line today to help answer as many questions as we can. And both Rachel and Brendan are work in our business counseling function. And Brendan, maybe I'll turn it to you first to introduce yourself, and then Rachel, and maybe each of you want to say something about the kinds of calls we get on our helpline and what you do every day.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Laura. So I'm the Business Resources Manager of Western Canada, which basically means that myself and my team, we field your calls across the West, but you know what, we also help out with the East too, so Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantic. Chances are at some point you and I are going to have a discussion or trade some emails. We take a lot of calls that are sort of how can you help me right now? So how can we help increase cash flow via the financial programs? Or, you know, how can I help manage my employees? So things like my employee just tested positive for COVID, what can I do? And we do have those answers for you. And when we don't have those answers for you, we escalate it to the expert, which is Rachel. So Rachel, that segues nicely into your introduction.
Thanks, Brendan. And yeah, so I am the federal coordinator for special projects, which kind of just means I deal with a lot of the escalations from BR, where really BR doesn't have the answer. So, well, I try to use some of Corinne's contacts to get some answers for members. Yeah, it's an exciting time right now because we're hearing a lot of questions about the CEWS, CEBA, and everything that you guys are here to learn about. So hopefully we can shed some light on that today.
Thank you, everyone. So together, the four of us are going to do what we can to answer your questions. And for those questions that we can't answer today, our commitment is always that we are working to get you those answers. And so Corinne has great contacts with CRA. Rachel and Brendan have good contacts as well. And so we're working to get you as many answers as we can. And of course, with the CEWS program just being, the applications just being open last week, there are lots of questions on that and many that we are still trying to get answers to. But we will be as clear as we can about what we know and what we're still trying to get answers to from CRA on today's webinar. And you can always check our website and call our helpline for more information. If we go to the next slide, I often like to share some of our most current research. So we released these are our latest dashboard numbers that we just released earlier this week. And you can find these at our smallbusinesseveryday.ca website. So we're frequently updating policymakers across Canada as well as the public on how small business is doing. These are the national numbers. We also have numbers for every province. And we've done a little bit of a deeper dive too on Toronto and Peel, where there are closures, and of course the dashboard for those regions is significantly looks different, with only about 50% open and more like 24% at normal sales. So that just gives you a little overview of how things are going. On the next slide, I also like to start the webinars with a few quotes, and I know that applying for government programs can be very, very frustrating. And we've heard a lot of questions come through the helpline, particularly with respect to some of the definitions that CRA is using and some of the confusion. So we picked a few to kind of maybe help with that. So laughter and tears, both responses to frustration and exhaustion. I prefer to laugh since there's less cleaning to do afterwards. That put a smile on my face. And then, you know, becoming very focused on the outcomes, not the obstacles, is a good way to conquer frustration. And then I thought the last one by Molly Ringel was also quite funny. So getting there sometimes without punching or kicking everyone. I don't know. I think November, it's great November's in the rearview mirror, because I know it's been a very tough month for a lot of people, and it seems like patience is wearing thin. And I think the last few miles of a marathon are often the hardest, and we are in those last few miles for sure with this epidemic. Okay, so let's, pandemic, I should say. So what's the key topics covered today? We're going to get Corinne back on in a moment to talk about what's new, and then we're going to do quite a bit on the emergency rent subsidy today, because that one opened a week ago, and there are lots and lots of questions. So we'll share the top questions that we're getting, and we're going to do a really sort of some overview of getting into the application and some of that content that may prove helpful. And then of course we're going to take as many of your questions as possible. So I'm going to bring Corinne back on, and she's going to walk us through the highlights of the federal economic statement and give us a little update. Still lots new, Corinne, for this late. Like, it feels like the last number of weeks there's been a lot of news. So I'll leave it over to you to share that news, and I'll be back shortly.
Great, thank you, Laura, and hello everybody again. So we did have the federal economic statement, which basically was a mini budget that the government did on Monday of this week. And along with sort of talking about what the state of the country's finances are like, which was something that was long overdue, they also announced a bunch of new things that may potentially be helpful to many of you. And I already had some questions around some of these, so I'm glad that we can maybe answer them now. So I'm just going to run through some of the really key. This isn't everything that was announced, but these are the ones we think may be of some interest to you guys that are listening here today. First of all, they did announce what Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and rent subsidy are going to look like beyond December. So basically for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, the amount of subsidy is going to increase to 75% as a maximum as of December 20th through to March 13th. So that's the next 3 periods that will then have a maximum availability of subsidy to 75%. That extra jump from 65 to 75%, that 10% extra, is actually going to be added to the top-up multiplier. So if you understand the wage subsidy, once you hit a 50% revenue loss, you then actually change the multiplier from 0.8 to 1.25. But in this new scenario, you'll change that multiplier from 1.25 to 1.75. So the 0.8, our understanding, remains for anything less than 50% as a multiplier. But once you get over that 50% revenue loss, your multiplier will go up, and you have the potential of getting even more of a subsidy. And this means that anybody with a 70% or higher revenue loss will see a 75% wage subsidy. So that is going up a little bit. So that's good news. Plus, we know at least for the next 3 months to the mid-March what that is going to look like. Same thing with the Canada Emergency Rent Subsidy, which we'll get into a lot more detail about in a few minutes. That has been extended now under its current rate, which is that 65% with a top up to 90%. And we'll get into how all that works in a minute. But that's been extended now to March 13th, also 2021, the same as the wage subsidy. So those are 2. We also had an extension in the, I
know. I just want to make sure that people are clear, because I found this really confusing. Is just that everybody knows that these 2 programs, CEWS and CERS, will go through June, but these are the formulas that will be used. And originally on the CERS, that formula was only going until December 19th, I believe, or 13th.
Yes, and the same for the wage subsidy. Yeah,
that's a bit correct. Just so people are clear, the programs are still going through next June, but the formula has now been established at a more generous level right through
Yes,
March.
thanks. It's a good clarification. That's absolutely true. In fact, they did reconfirm in the federal economic statement that these programs will be around till June of next year, but this is what it's going to look like for the next 3 periods. So thank you. That's very important.
So you just need to brush up on all your high school math so that you understand these formulas.
I know.
Fortunately, there are calculators, right? There are calculators, but
Yeah.
that
will help. Well, we'll certainly talk more about the wage subsidy in a future webinar, or we can try answering any questions you might have now that we know. But certainly we'll get into some of the math on that front too, because it is changing a little bit for the wage subsidy. Great. All right. So the other application deadline that has been extended is for the Canada Emergency Business Account. It was originally supposed to expire at the end of December to apply for it. It has now been extended also to March 31st of 2021. However, we still have no news on when the CEBA extension, which is that extra $20,000, half of which will be forgivable, will be coming into effect. Again, we hear rumors, they're close. There's going to be something very, very soon. Could be as early as tomorrow, but I'm doubtful that it is. I think it's more likely next week, even possibly early the following week. But it is within the next time days, and we are continuing to put pressure on them to get it out as quickly as possible. Our hope is when they do make the next announcement, that announcement will be it's going to open today or open on Monday. We'll have to see what happens, but it has still not been announced, that extra amount of money, but it is going to be before Christmas for sure. But now you have more time to apply for it as well. So that was the important part of that as well. The government also announced, as part of the federal economic statement, an additional $500 million is going to be provided to the regional development agencies. So that's Western Economic Diversification, FedNor, FedDev, the Quebec, COA. There's about 7 of them across the country. In our appendix of this, that's with this particular presentation, there's a list of all of them in there. They're getting that extra money because there are a number of businesses who are not eligible for the Canada Emergency Business Account, but were able to get a similar type of loan through these RDAs through something called the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund. So after much feedback from many of you and our pushing with the government and asking many, many questions, they have agreed now to provide a similar top-up to anybody who got a CEBA-like type funding through the RRRF. Will also be able to access up to $20,000 with half of it interest-free, half of it forgivable, once it has been announced there as well. So again, not yet available, but will become available as well to those who got those types of loans through the regional development agencies. They're also committing at least a quarter of any new funding that they get to the tourism sector in particular. So if you're in that sector, there should be some more funding coming for you through the regional development agency as well. In addition, they also announced a new loan program. Again, I'll be very clear, this program is not yet available, but this new program, they're calling it the Highly Affected Sectors Credit Availability Program. Rely on government to make these things never simple to talk about, but that's what it is, or CAP for short. Anyways, this is going to go, it's mainly targeting those highly affected sectors. They actually focused on and pinpointed tourism, hospitality, hotels, art, and entertainment. Doesn't mean it's going to only be them. If you're a highly affected sector and not one of those, you may still be able to access it, but we don't know all the parameters quite yet. What it is, it's a 100% government guaranteed loan of up to $1 million. So it's really meant to be for those smaller companies. They're going to provide favorable interest rates that's better than what you can normally get through the BCAP type loans that are already out there. So they're going to try to keep it reasonable and probably better than what you would be able to get normally through your own bank. But again, there will be interest rates applied. And the terms to pay back are going to be up to 10 years. There's going to be fairly lengthy terms as well for payback. You will have the option, as you do right now with BCAP, to pay interest only for the first 6 months. It will be administered by the Business Development Bank of Canada, but you're going to be able to access it through your bank. So that is how it's going to work. But it is supposed to be much more streamlined. We've had a lot of negative feedback about the other loan guarantee programs that have been around for a few months now. And they have heard that, and they have telling us it's going to be a much more streamlined, easier to access program with access to the funds a lot more quickly. So we don't know anything more than that at this point, only that it's not yet available, and we're going to try and find out when it's going to become available, and obviously a lot more details around how it's going to work. But please know that this is on the table now too as another option for financing. Next slide. Last little bit from the federal economic statement, as I said, there were many things in this. These are just the ones we thought may be of interest. They also announced that they're going to spend between 3 and 4% of GDP, which is about 70 to 100 billion over the next 3 years on stimulus measures to help with economic recovery. No idea what it's going to be spent on. They say they're going to actually consult with stakeholders to come up with a plan. We'll probably get a lot more detail in the budget, which will likely be sometime in the spring of next year. But that is where they're going to start. I think they're planning. So we're going to have to watch closely how that's going to work. They did announce some new taxes, all of them sort of targeting large multinational or international companies. The first is finally applying sales taxes to online giants, such as we call the Netflix tax. The fact is, at this point in time, online digital giants who sell online services to Canadians that are not Canadian didn't have to charge sales tax to them, but their Canadian equivalents did. So they're evening the playing field there. Also for fulfillment centers and platforms-based short-term rentals, so the Airbnbs of the world, they are going to require them all now to charge sales taxes when selling to Canadians, effective July 1st of next year. They're also proposing a new tax on corporations that provide digital services. So I believe this is, I think the target here is like the Googles and the Facebooks of the world, to be introduced on January 1st, 2022. They are working with other countries around the world to come up with a consistent system, but feel like they have to start moving forward until that system is sort of set up and running. And finally, something for those of you that may have employees that have had to work from home throughout the pandemic, there is, of course, the ability to deduct home office expenses for many individuals who work from home. And because so many people did this year, there would normally be quite a bit of paperwork for the employee and for you as an employer to get that sort of squared away. So we've been lobbying hard for them to make it simple for this year, or one time. And so thankfully in the federal economic statement, they did say they will allow Canadians to claim up to $400 based on the amount of time working from home, without the need to track detailed expenses. So I think that's going to help out a lot of individuals who are forced to work from home over the course of the last several months, without having to fill a lot of paperwork for them and vice versa. So finally, just what's new is we've unfortunately continued to have further closures right across the country. Since we last talked about this, new restrictions were introduced for businesses in Halifax, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, joining businesses that remain in fairly big lockdown areas of Manitoba, parts of Quebec and Ontario and BC. And as you can see, there is a bunch of what those new closures are in Alberta. Both Alberta and Saskatchewan were effective November 27th, some of the additional reductions in services that were imposed. None of whom have closed, neither of those places have they really closed a lot of the businesses completely. There's still some allowance of businesses to remain open, say at a 25% capacity. However, of course, this is restrictions that hadn't been in place earlier. So, and Halifax as well has started to address this as well. So those continue, and we continue to watch closely and trying to push governments to allow some limited amount of capacity, as has been done, as you can see in places like Saskatchewan and Alberta, and to make sure that to keep everybody safe in the process. So that's where we're at. I'm going to now turn it over to my colleagues to talk a lot more detail about the rent subsidy. So back over to you, Laura, and to the team.
Yeah, fun with the rent subsidy. Thanks, Corinne. And we're going to run you through the basics first, and then we're going to get into a bit of a deeper dive. And so the first thing that everybody needs to know is renters and property owners can apply directly based on revenue loss. So this is sort of the basics that have already been announced that many of you are probably familiar with, but I'll just run you through some of them. So to make sure we're all on the same, starting with the same base here. And revenue loss of any size is eligible. So even if you're down 1% relative to the period to the period that you're comparing to in the previous year, or to that January-February period, if you were opening early in 2020, that even if you're down 1%, that qualifies. And so any revenue loss, that's different from the previous program where there was that steep threshold of you needed 70% revenue loss to qualify. So that's important to know. And it covers up to 65% of your rent. or if you're a property owner, it covers eligible expenses. And we'll get into that in a minute, what that looks like. Plus, there's a possible top up for businesses under lockdown restrictions, and that could mean that you get up to 90% of your rent covered if you're in that category. So applications for the first 2 periods are now open, and we expect that the 3rd period will likely open December 20th. So you might want to mark that down on your calendars. And we know that for at least the first period, the first payments for that will start on December 4th. So that's tomorrow. So that's good news. That's when we understand the checks will start hitting the bank accounts. And then for that 2nd period, within 3 to 8 days of filing. So you have to commit to pay your rent for the claim period, for the rent period that you're claiming within 60 days. And we think that's going to be a fairly simple attestation. And then you have to do a separate application for each claim period. So these are the basics. And if we go to the next slide, and maybe I'll get Rachel to join me just because there may be some other things she wants to add in, and she's going to walk us through some of the other pieces of it. So Rachel, I'll just have you join me, and then the 2 of us can stay on for the rent piece. So this just gives you a sense. We just put this table up to give you a sense of how much of your rent might be covered. So, you know, if you're down, for example, 40% revenue loss on this table, your rent subsidy will be 32%. Of your rent will be eligible. Now that's up to a maximum of $75,000, so we should make that clear per location, and an overall maximum of $300,000 if you have more than 1 location. So this is how the CEWS will be calculated. There is an important piece on revenue that I think we should mention here, Rachel, before we get into some of the other details. We might mention it again, but this has been a little bit confusing for people. So the revenue loss is calculated at the entity level, not at the location level. So we needed to get some clarification on that from CRA, and we now have that clarification. The revenue loss you calculate at the entity level. So if you have more than 1 location, you have to look at the average of those, that revenue, your overall revenue loss by entity. But then your rent expense you will submit by the individual location level. So that's a difference. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that, Rachel, because I think you're getting lots of questions on the helpline about that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add on that is that because some people get a little bit confused, you do have to determine your eligible expenses on the location basis, just as you said, Laura. Can't emphasize that enough. But yeah. Rachel,
just to be clear with people, and because you know the common language way of saying eligible expenses would be rent, right? And so, but in CRA speak, it's eligible expenses. And so we'll get into that in a minute, but think of it as basically your rent payment, and then we'll get into the details of what's included in that and what's not. So when you hear us use eligible expenses, that's what how CRA is basically saying, think of it as your rent payment. Okay, let's move on from this slide, and because we have a little bit more to cover here, and we're getting now into some of the top questions, Rachel, that you are hearing on the helpline. And so why don't you walk us through? I know the one we're hearing about the holding companies and operating companies and that relationship. We've got that a lot last week. Still hearing a lot of questions on that. And before you go through some of these questions, maybe I'll just make the point to everyone. We're giving you the answers to these questions, but we are also lobbying on some of these things. And so we are working right now on a letter to the finance minister. And one of those things we are raising is the holding company and operating company issue, because I know people are going to ask us that. What are you doing about this? And if you have good examples, feel free to let us know through the webinar. We've collected a number of them already, but we will be writing a letter on this. And we understand the frustration on this, but what we want to do here is make it clear what we know about this at this time. And Brendan, you've joined as well, so there may be some other things you're hearing on the helpline that you want to contribute, which is terrific. But Rachel, I'll turn it over to you first, unless you wanted to add anything before I turn it back to Rachel. Brendan.
No, my addition here is just to save the awkwardness of having to ask yourself a question and answer your own question. So I'm just here to pose the questions to Rachel, but as we go, I'm certainly happy to add to it as well if I feel like it wasn't a fulsome answer, but Rachel usually hits the nail right on the head.
Fantastic. Go for it. All right, I'll turn it
All
over
right.
to you, and I'll just add in any color commentary if needed.
Sounds good. So as you guys know, we have been getting slammed with questions in BR about the CEWS. And so probably the top question that we continuously talk about is, am I eligible? Actually, I should let Brendan ask me.
And it was just made awkward by someone who didn't know what was going on. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, no, not at all, not at all. So these questions do come directly from our phone line, which means they come directly from our memberships, which is you. So I will pose them as they've been posed to us, and Rachel will hopefully do her very best to answer any questions you might have currently that are raised in your mind too, after listening to the wonderful presentation my colleagues have given so far. So the first question is, am I eligible for CEWS if I own a business that pays rent to a holding company that I own as well? So this is a question about arm's length.
Yeah,
Rachel?
and it's super tough because we've been hearing a lot of difficult scenarios, and we have to be the bearer of bad news in this case, because no, this rent revenue, it's passed between two people or entities that are not at arm's length, which actually makes the rent expense ineligible for the CEWS. So I also want to clarify here that it doesn't have to do with the affiliated companies. It's because the rent is paid between two people or entities not at arm's length.
So it's the revenue
Rachel,
transfer that's the issue here, Rachel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is something that that we're definitely, like Laura and Corinne are definitely pushing forwards because we hear so often that it's not right and it's unfair, and it was allowed in SECRA. So this is definitely something that CFIB is pushing forwards.
yeah, perfect. Thank you. And to take that question a step further, so we often get questions where there's shareholders in a holdings company, and they say, well, you know what, I own 40% or I own 50%, and I have a partner as well who owns the other half. But my partner doesn't own the operating company. I own that. So in that scenario, how would they go about doing the application, or can they even? Are they still deemed ineligible?
Yeah, and this one's a tricky one that we're still trying to get like solid writing from CRA. But if we go back to what we do have so far, and that's the information that non-arm's length revenues are not eligible for the CEWS, it's still not a great answer, but the answer is still no. But if you do have eligible expenses that are at arm's length, then you can still apply for the CEWS for those.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just to clarify for everybody what that means in sort of the most layman terms possible is, if you do own the company, and correct me if I'm wrong, Rachel, not the company, sorry, if you own the facility that the operating company rents, you can still claim a portion of those expenses. You just can't claim that rent. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly.
Fabulous. All right, I didn't confuse anyone further, I hope. Question number 2, if I opened my business after March 1st, am I eligible for the CEWS?
And this is something that you'll hear Laura and Corinne are still pushing hard as well. We know that we want to get to a point where Canada has a great future, and we include all the new businesses as well. But currently under the CEWS legislation, if you don't have revenues for January and February, you're not eligible to the CEWS. If you are taking over a business, though, you would be able to use their, and it depends for most situations, but you would be able to use your predecessor's CRA business number or payroll number, or if you had a payroll accounting, a payroll third-party payroll provider, you could use you could be eligible to get the CEWS.
Perfect, thanks, Rachel. And important to note too is that came from that came from the CFIB, from you guys telling us that, hey, this is a situation we need added. So that's something that wasn't in place when it was first rolled out, and now it is. And I'm actually referencing the wage subsidy program because now they run mostly parallel. So thanks for that. And then the third question, of course, on this slide is, my business is affected by travel restrictions and/or requirements to limit capacity, but not technically ordered to close down. Am I eligible for the additional lockdown support, which can, of course, support you up to 90% of your costs?
Yeah, and this one's another heartbreaker, I have to say, because we hear about travel agencies and other people that are shut down. And so the answer is a difficult no, because unless your business is directly subjected to a public health order and you're required to shut down or partially shut down. So for clarification, for a restaurant, that might be shutting down the indoor part, right? Not so just the reduction of clients is not good enough. You have to have something that's shut down. So that is what will make you eligible for the lockdown support.
And I know, Rachel, a lot of people in the travel industry would say, well, the border is shut down, so how does that not count?
Yeah.
But they're not counting that, unfortunately, and we had clarification around that. Again, this is another area, and we're looking for all kinds of areas. So if there are others beyond the ones we're flagging for you today, please let us know on the webinar, because right after this call, I've got a call on the letter that we're writing to talk about some of the problems and the gaps with the rent subsidy program.
Excellent. Thanks for that insight, Laura. So moving on to questions that pertain more directly to renters now. What counts as rent, i.e. eligible expenses, that you hear us use that phrase a lot, for the CEWS program?
Yeah, and this is a question that comes up quite a lot. And so I think it's really important to emphasize that rent is considered an amount that is required to be paid under a net lease. And I think a lot of people forget what a net lease might entail. And so if you have payments from a third-party provider, so for example, we have an example here. So either a landlord or a third party like Hydro, if it's included in your net lease that it's something that you'll have to cover, that can be included in your eligible expenses as long as it's not at arm's length.
So you're looking for anything that is in your lease agreement that you are required to pay, and it might be that you are required to pay that as in the base rent to the landlord. It might be that you're just responsible for paying it to that third party, but those are the things that are included. So thanks for working so hard to clarify that one, Rachel, because I know this is a tricky question. And
sure.
What
it really is.
you were saying is easier.
Pardon me?
What's excluded is easier.
Yeah. So we do have some examples there as to what can be included, and we do get asked what can be excluded or what is excluded, sorry. And it's any of the following in the examples here. So sales taxes such as GST, HST, and provincial sales taxes, damages that your tenant might do on the property, interest or penalties on unpaid amounts. So I'm just thinking about SECRA applicants as well. So just bear that in mind, that kind of interest does not qualify. And then tenant insurance and leasehold improvements. I've heard some people talk about content insurance and if that's included or not. And from the way that the legislation is written right now, it seems like no, it's not included.
Perfect. And then I think these might be a couple of our last one, and these are directed more towards the owners of the facilities. What property expenses can you claim for the CEWS? Because of course you can't claim the rent amount or your mortgage.
Yeah, and you'll notice we really separated these out because the calculation is different if you're a renter or if you're an owner. And so what can be included in eligible expenses is property and similar taxes, and that includes school tax, municipal tax, if these are part of your property tax assessments, and then property insurance and interest on commercial mortgages. I can tell you that CRA does look at if there are agreements between the business and shareholders, if there's a written agreement in those cases, if there's any muddy situations that need to be clarified. So make sure you have your documented proof, which is something that I know Laura pushes to remind you guys all the time.
Yeah, it always bears repeating, absolutely. And then the last question, of course, is what are my property expenses that I cannot claim for the CEWS?
Yeah, and again, this is kind of a reminder that these rent payments or these eligible expense payments or eligible expenses do have to fall within the period. So anything that falls outside of the CEWS period would not be eligible, an eligible expense. Yeah, and then the last one is, again, a reemphasis on payments between non-arm's length and related entities. Those are not eligible for the CEWS.
Wonderful. Okay,
All
and I
right.
will gracefully bow out, and I'll leave it to the experts. Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks, Brendan.
Great. So Rachel, I think you're going to walk us through the kind of the 4 steps. But before any of these 4 steps, I know one of the things you're recommending is just fool around with the calculator. You don't have to sign in. You can just go to the CEWS calculator. You've got a link there and just kind of get comfortable with it. That's the first step. If you've been holding off or avoiding, just have a look there and see what you need. So that's our kind of important tip. And then there are 4 steps. So why don't you walk us through those 4 steps, Rachel?
Yeah, and I was even going to share my screen for a second just to show you guys how easy it actually is to go through the calculator. I don't know if you can see my screen. Perfect. Okay, so here I'm just on the CEWS landing page. So after having Googled CEWS, it's the first thing that pops up. And you can see that there's some great sections here. There's 7 sections that will be really helpful if you have any questions on the CEWS. What I like to show is the calculate your subsidy amount, because really you can see I don't need a CRA business number at all to go through this. I can kind of click through, and if I have any questions about affiliated entities, for example, there's a drop down button and that'll guide me to maybe an FAQ hub page that will be help me figure out if I'm actually affiliated or not. And going back to the calculator, you can see here that I'll have to select a claim period. And then you can see that I'm just going to run through this right now just to show you again how easy it is. I can just start playing with it and put in random numbers and adjust it. And this is really helpful just to get an idea of what your subsidy will be, because even if you're applying with an accountant, you're still going to be liable for any mistakes that they might make. So it's really good to just have a good understanding as to what your business could receive from the CEWS. And if you do,
I think, Rachel, you're raising a good point, because some people may be thinking about, do I want to do this through my accountant, or do I want to try and do it on my own? And, spending 5 minutes on this calculator before, even pulling together your documents may help you answer that question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, completely. And so I'm not going to go into detail about how you can use this calculator. We do actually have a really great webinar that we did with CRA. And so what we will do is we have actually the link in our presentation.
We have a link on an upcoming slide, I think, and so we'll show you where that is. But we can go back to our presentation now. There we go. And so once you've done you've fooled around a little bit with the calculator, then you actually have to do your calculation, right, Rachel? That's the first step. So why don't you walk us through these steps?
Yeah. So again, just like Laura said, once you play around with the calculator, make sure that you have your important informations, and then the calculator will actually help you determine line by line what you need to put into your application. So it is really helpful, and it takes out a lot of the math that you might need to do. And we'll get into the details of what you need a little bit later. But the second part is that you'll need a MyBA or Represent a Client portal. So if you don't have that, you should definitely get on it. There is also a YouTube video on how to register for MyBA. It can take up to 2 weeks to receive a code just to get access to it. So the sooner you do this, the better. And So I'm just going to go to the next slide quickly, because one of the big questions that we're getting right now is, where do I find, once I'm in the MyBA, where do I find the CEWS number that I will have to apply for? That's actually step 3. And you'll see that if you have a GST number, a payroll account, that it's right beneath that box, and it's under other services, and we've highlighted it in yellow so that you can see that it's all the way at the bottom of your MyBA account. So yeah, let's go back to the applying for CEWS.
It's hiding. That's why you're getting all the calls. People, it's the last place people would look. But that's step 3, right? So get your CEWS number, and Rachel just showed you. Look for it at the bottom of the page.
Yeah, and so yeah, hopefully that'll help you find the CEWS number to apply for it. And we've heard getting the CEWS number is taking quite a while as well. We're still waiting on CRA to find out what's up with that. But yeah, once you finally get your CEWS number, then you can go back into your MyBA account and then apply for any of the eligible claim periods, and using the numbers that you got from the CRA CEWS calculator.
And on the calculator then, Rachel, and I know we say this in a minute, you're going to want to, once you've actually put in all your information, you're going to want to either print that or save it so you can refer back to it when you actually do your application.
Yes, completely. And they make it easy. They have a button for you, so you can download it as a PDF or you can print it. Perfect.
Great. Okay.
So yeah, we'll just go back to that step 1 now.
The calculator.
Yeah.
All important calculator.
Yes. Just because a few people are like, what do I need before I actually play with this calculator and get my definite numbers? And you'll need to figure out that first one. And we kind of put this in order of what you'll see when you start using the calculator, but you'll have to decide or have to know whether you have affiliated entities or not to apply for the CEWS, because as we mentioned before, affiliated entities is fine. You'll have to determine the proportion of who gets what and how many people are applying, kind of thing. So yeah, that will be important for you to know. And if revenues are flowing between entities, because those might be ineligible. The second really important thing that you should know, and hopefully you do already know, are your gross revenue numbers for September, October of 2019, or January, February of 2020, which can be called the prior referencing period if you're aware with the technical term. And you'll also need to know your September, October, November gross revenue numbers as well for 2020. And then the third item there is that you'll need to know if your provincial or federal government has put a public health order, or even municipal government, that has caused you to close or stop certain activities representing at least 25% of your overall revenues during the pre-pandemic period. And then the last point there is is to figure out what your eligible expenses are. So if you're a renter, that's going to be what is your monthly rent? What is your rental income if you sublease? And if you own, what is your annual or monthly property taxes? What's your property insurance, interest on commercial mortgages, and rental income?
Great. So a couple more quick questions here, and we'll get through this quickly, Rachel, because we want to get to some questions. But I know already, actually, Dawn had the question about what happens if I made a mistake on my application? Can I fix it or amend it? So let's go to that second question first. The helpline's pretty self-explanatory, but what if you make a mistake?
Yeah, and so CRA, if most of you who have already applied for the CEWS will know that there's an amending feature. Right now, CRA hasn't been able to enable this feature in the CEWS, but they say that it'll be available in the new year. So don't panic if you've made a mistake. Just make a note, put a sticky note on your computer, kind of thing, that it's something that you'll have to go back and fix. You will have about 180 days, which is approximately 6 months. to go back and amend your application.
And then there is a helpline, Rachel, and we've got it here on this slide as well. CRA helpline, we're hearing 15 to 45-minute waits on that helpline. But you're going to need some things before you call, so save yourself the frustration of getting through and then asking them having them ask you for information that you don't have on hand. This is the information you need on hand.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
I think let's go back to that slide for a minute, because there's some other things people can do if they get stuck. Rachel, do you want to walk us through?
Yeah, so for the CRA business inquiries line, the time frame will depend on the time of day that you call them. So sometimes it's easier to get through to them in the mornings. They are open till 8 p.m. And so there's a lot of time in the day that you can apply, or you can give them a call. There is, of course, the CFIB-BR counselors helpline. If you have questions, I do recommend that you come with a lot of that information that you've tried using the calculator already with, just so we can get a better understanding as to how we can help you better. And government as well has put together that website that we've mentioned and pointed to already. And they do have a technical guidance sheet as well that we're hoping they're going to be updating as more questions and clarification comes out. And then the last one, like we mentioned before, we did a webinar with the CRA. So if you are waiting at any point in time and you're just waiting for a BR counselor or a CRA, business inquiries officer, you can kind of just watch this. We actually have timestamps to help you figure out what you need when.
And of course, there's also, your accountants are up on this as well. So that may be a resource for you. And probably our last bullet we should have put in the first place. Like, if you get stuck, don't panic, take a deep breath. There are resources available for you. And so hopefully this slide will be helpful if you find yourself in that position. And there are lots of questions still that we are working to get answers to as well, particularly if you're in the category where your question might be a little bit more technical. Some of those we're still just waiting for some answers from CRA, and I think they're working through some of it as they're getting the questions as well. So on the next slide, I think we're getting close to the end, so we can then take a few questions. This is just that important tip that I typically had put at the beginning of the webinars. I've moved it down a little bit, but keeping that log or journal. And the example of making a mistake on this application is a good example of what you might put in that log, just to keep a note of it while it's fresh in your mind and you've just been wrangling with the application and you know exactly what you missed. I forgot to include my insurance payments that are included in my lease. Go back and check this. Make a note to yourself. This is a good place to do that. So keeping a business journal, because there's just so many things that are different right now. And then of course, here are our resources, and those are available to you. And let's leave this slide up while I pull Brendan and Corinne back, and we'll take some questions. For those of you who are new to our webinars, we typically go over just a few minutes to get, we get through the content of the webinar, but then we take as many questions as we can. And I've been presenting, so I'm going to, or I've been on the screen with Rachel, so I'm going to maybe lean a little bit on Brendan and Corinne for asking some questions here.
Sure. So yes, I've been frantically trying to answer as many as I can, because they certainly are coming in fast and furious. I, of course, have a wide variety of questions, both on the rent subsidy, but also on wage subsidy as well. So, but I'm going to throw one out to you on the rent subsidy, because I was not able to answer it. So I thought I'd hold on to it and see what you guys thought. So Tara was asking for the CEWS, the other expenses we can claim, such as insurance and utilities. If we pay those once a year, insurance, for example, or every other month for utilities, can we spread out those expenses over the months, or only apply them in the months we pay them?
I think, Rachel, on the application, it can be spread over the months for that. And the important thing is that it's part of the legal lease agreement.
Yeah, exactly. So you'll notice if you're an owner, you can actually put in your expenses at your choice, either annually or within the period or within the month. And then the calculator actually does that adjustment for you, and then tells you what you would have paid in respect to that period. So if your numbers are a little bit off, just remember there's 4 days in September and then 24 days in October. So it's like based on a daily rate. So to answer that question, yeah.
Clara might be a renter, and I'm not sure they have that same breakdown on the calculator for the renter, but I think you can probably, I think the best bet is probably to break it down by month. And just, again, keep a note in your journal how you did this, if that's not clear on the application, why you did it that way, so that, you know, if 3 months from now you're asked, well, you know, what's this? You can say, well, that's insurance, it's included in my rent, it's annual, I broke it down, I divided by 12 and did a monthly calculation on it. So if it's not easily, I don't know if it is in the renter application, that same division, Rachel.
It's not, but I think it's a good sign that if it's allowable for the owners, that it should be allowable for the renters as well, as long as it makes sense and you have the calculation.
And actually, thank you, Tara, for raising that, because we can raise that with CRA, that they should make that easy on the application and make it clear on the application.
That's why I thought I'd ask you. I also want to get to one more, and then I'll ask Brendan if he has any couple. But the other one comes from Jody, and it's actually about the wage subsidy, but I couldn't answer it either. But Jody is saying that, have we heard anything about the wage subsidy period 6 calculator not working? The calculations were not working properly all last week, but I haven't seen anything from CRA regarding it. Do you know anything about this, Rachel or Brendan?
So it's a little bit difficult when we hear these kinds of questions, because every so often there's a slight tweak that we send over to CRA to fix. And so really, if she could send us an email about what her experience is and send us any screenshots if possible of what she's going through, then we can see if there really is a mistake. Sometimes some people overlook things, and I don't think that's the case here, but sometimes there's a reason for why they're positioned in a certain way, but it's not unfamiliar is what I'm saying as well.
But nor have we been getting a horde of calls saying that
was, yeah, that there's a problem. Okay, so Jody, if you want to give us a call, we'll see what we can sort of work out with you if you're still having troubles. Brendan, I have a couple more, but Brendan, maybe you want to.
Yeah, I do, absolutely. I have 2 here, one for Rachel and then one for you, Corinne, although Jasmine might be the better person to ask. Why don't I start off with that one? So this is from Stephen, and Stephen is asking about for details on the PAUPM and the PACTE, which I believe are in reference to Quebec-specific programs for those businesses who've been ordered to shut down or those who are in red zones. I don't know if you have any information to share on that, or maybe we can defer to our colleague Jasmine.
I know a little bit about it. Okay, so if they, so what was the name of the person asking?
Stephen.
Stephen. So Stephen, in the appendix of the actual presentation, which is at the attachment, at the end of it, there's actually a list of financial programs by province, and those programs are listed there for Quebec. So you may want to take a look at that and see if that answers some of your questions. There's also links. There should be links there to them. I know one of them is sort of a subset of the other one. One's a loan program that's available. And then I think the other is a subset for people in the red zones, that they can get a certain portion of those loans forgiven if they're in the red zone. So both of those should be listed there. So take a look at that.
Yeah, maybe Reem, if you just scroll down a couple of slides into the appendix, you can
yes.
Show Stephen where we're at.
It should be near the beginning of the appendix. Next slide.
So this is a good opportunity to, yeah, there you go. One more slide down, and I think we should get to Quebec.
Quebec to be on the next one, yeah. There you go.
So this is what Corinne's referring to. So it's in the slide deck we have, and it's a good reminder for all webinar participants that we put some additional information in the appendix. These are things that we've covered in previous webinars that we think still might be relevant and helpful, but we're not going to review it every single webinar, because otherwise we'd be here for half the day.
And just as an aside, these programs, this was just updated today, so all of these should be current as we speak. So.
Yeah, so we try to keep the appendix current as well as the rest of the information for you. It's a lot to keep up with for everyone, so hopefully this is making people's lives a little bit easier, and it's there by province. So we'll go back up to the slide that has the helpline number on it, just so that people have that if they need it. And what other questions do we have?
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks. I have one more for Rachel, and this is in regards to the CEWS program. Can we apply as we pay a sublease? So they're a sublessee. Are they eligible for CEWS in that scenario?
Yeah, so the answer is yes. I know, right? Finally a yes. Yeah, so and just keep in mind again the non-arm's length revenue though issue. So if there is that relationship, then you might have an issue. But I'm assuming that Brendan put that towards me because it was an arm's length situation. And so the answer is yes.
Perfect. I believe so. So Mona, hopefully that helps you out with that question. Hopefully it just made your day that much better. I'll defer to someone else for other questions. Those answer my questions actually.
Okay, I have many more. So Myra has a good suggestion. She's saying, are you able to include a summary of the CRA year-end reporting requirements for all the government subsidies received on a webinar in the next couple of weeks? So we'll definitely do that, Myra. We have actually, Rachel and I just had a lengthy call with CRA earlier this week where we tried to get them to provide us with more details on what some of the tax obligations are going to be for all these subsidies in 2021 for the year 2020. We know a little bit, but obviously we want to make sure we have all the right details. So that's definitely on our radar already, Myron. It's something we'll absolutely try to get into the next couple of webinars before the end of the year with as much information as we have so far. CRA told us they weren't quite ready to give us that information. So they're, I think, grappling with it right now as well. So, but definitely, I think it's something that's important given all this extra subsidy money coming in, what has to be claimed, what doesn't. And I know it's going to be a bit confusing for a lot of folks. So we'll see what we can do in the next couple of webinars on that front. So thank you, Myra.
Can I add something on that?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so CRA did promise us that they would do a webinar, a joint webinar with us for our Red Tape Awareness Week. So hopefully, maybe that's a better time frame as to when you can check back and for a webinar on that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay, a couple more on the rent subsidy, and I've had a few questions, so probably requires, and I know you've talked about this in your section, but it's coming up a bit. Rosemary's asking, being in the events industry, events were canceled due to shutdowns and limited capacity. Does this make us eligible for the additional lockdown support? I also had a previous question, and I don't have their name in front of me yet, who's a travel agency, who's also has, businesses down 90% because of the border closures and wants to know if they'd be eligible for the lockdown support. So you may want to give details again of what the issues are around that.
Yeah, so I guess I'll take this one. Travel agencies, we've heard, and all of those examples, because there's no public health mandated requirements to close or partially close, they would not be eligible for the CEWS.
Yes, I'm sorry. I mean, I was
for the top up.
For the top up, yes, the top up part of it, up to the 90%. Yeah, but as I mentioned to one of the answers, this is on our list of things we're going to try to see if we can get more flexibility from government on. So it is on our list of areas that we are going to continue to advocate for and get changes for. I'm also going to just do another one on wage subsidy here. And Rachel and Brendan, I may pull you guys in on this one because it has a work share component, which is not something we've talked about in a while, but I think it's a good one to remind. So Christina's saying we are qualifying for the wage subsidy, have also had to put some of our locations on work sharing. On the wage subsidy application, we need to disclose the amount employees are paid to offset our wage subsidy amount. Our case officer has indicated we need to contact our employees to ask what they are getting paid. Is this correct? This will apply for our phase 10 application. Yes.
Sorry, I got a little bit eager on that one. Yes, and this is something that CFIB has written a letter on as well to ESDC Service Canada. that it's incredibly onerous to ask every individual employee to go on to their My Service account and take a screenshot of how much they will be receiving for EI Workshare, but that is what CRA is saying is allowable to do.
Yeah. And I'll sneak in another one that's not rent subsidy related. We'll go back to those ones. But Monica's asking about the temporary wage subsidy 10%. Is there a due date for the PD 27 form? And is there any way to submit it other than through the My Business Account option?
So I think that one's for me as well. So there isn't explicitly a public due date, but keep in mind that if you want to get your T4 summary, you're going to have to submit this. So it's better to submit it sooner than later. So hopefully that answers that question. As for if it can be submitted in any other way other than the MyBA account, maybe we'll double check that and get back to you. Because we have similar questions on this topic for the CERS and the CEWS, if something can be submitted. I mean, we know that for the CEWS, you can do that form, but this question has come up with the CERS as well.
Okay.
Rachel, I've got one that you might know, or it might be one that we have to check on, but Robert is asking, isn't it double dipping if we can apply for hydro gas relief and then also claim it in CERS? So in some provinces, they're providing hydro and gas relief as part of their provincial support package, right? And so, and I know governments are trying to avoid this kind of double dipping, but we haven't had this question before, so I don't know, is there a place on the CERS form where they're accommodating that, or is this one we're going to need to check on for Robert?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah. That's an interesting question you're asking, Robert. We'll check on that.
Yeah. I have Susan asking, do commercial condominium fees qualify for businesses that own their own business?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the question I would ask her is if there's an agreement that states that there's a requirement for her to pay that. And I would also say that this is something we're still waiting for written confirmation from CRA.
Okay. All right. I do have another one here. I'm going to slip in. It's actually on CEBA, but I may ask for whoever can help me out with this one. We have a business, this is Lynn, she's asking, we have a business that was purchased or taken over in November 2019. We have yet to qualify for most of the programs as we've not had a year end. So this is an issue we have heard about. However, on September 30th, 2020, we ended our first year. Can we use this year end to file for CEBA?
Oh, this is another heartbreaking one as well. And it's something that CFIB has identified as a gap to government as well. But you can't use anything in 2020 as your year end, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's unfortunate at this point. Again, it's another one of things that's on our long list of what we call gaps in the program. So we are aware of this issue and we are pushing them to make changes so that it could be fixed. All right, anything else on anybody else's end?
I think there are lots of questions that are more specific in nature that, and bear in mind with the program just being open just over a week, we're still working to get some of the answers from CRA, but we're getting kind of closer to the end of the hour. So maybe I'll ask if there are any last ones, Rachel or Brendan, that you want to put forward, and then we'll wrap up for today. But we're using all of these questions to think about what the FAQs should be on our website, and we'll work hard to get all of you the answers that you need. We didn't have some of the ones we didn't have today.
So I might throw in two more, if that's okay. One is from Neil. He's saying we own our building without a mortgage. Can we apply for municipal taxes and utilities like hydro and gas expenses? I
would have to think about that one, to be honest. I don't know, Corinne, do you happen, or Laura, do you happen to have a better answer to that?
There's a revenue if they qualify on the revenue side.
Could you repeat it again? The question?
You talking to me or to?
Yes, yeah, Corinne, yeah.
Okay, I've lost it now. They basically own their own. They basically own their own building. Like they own their building. They don't have a mortgage on it anymore, but they obviously would like to get some subsidy, and so they're asking if they can use the other expenses to get the subsidy.
I think so. I think so. As long as they have a revenue, you know, there's a revenue loss criteria. So they own the building, but have some revenue loss. I think that qualify.
I mean, it depends on the situation. So if there is, again, I'm going to say non-arm's length revenues involved, then that's an issue. And then something is escaping me that I thought I would share. But yeah, I would definitely bring that to a BR counselor. So that
it sounds like the question is, does not having a mortgage disqualify you? And I don't think that qualifies you from accessing the property tax part of it and the insurance part of it. So yes, there may be other things that disqualify you, but not having a mortgage is not a disqualifier.
Right.
I would agree with that.
So I've also had a few questions that I'm just going to raise on the wage subsidy, on the changes to the wage subsidy that are coming that we can't answer yet, but I just wanted to sort of note that this is again another example of how your questions help us figure out the details we need to get. So there's been a number of questions around the new wage subsidy and what the reference period will be. So come January, February, even March of next year, will they compare it to March 2019 or March 2020? And those are details we actually still don't know. So, or is it January 19 or January 2020? So I suspect they're going to keep it at the January 2019 but we don't know exactly yet. And that's exactly the type of detail we'll have to try and get from CRA in order to get back to everyone that had those questions. So thanks for that. And that's it, Laura.
Great. Well, I typically then do a little bit of a wrap up, and I'll maybe turn it over to you, Corinne, for your final comments, and then Rachel, you're welcome to make some too if you want, or I can wrap us up after that.
Sure, yeah, I guess we lost our colleagues. So I want to thank everybody for joining us once again. We hope that this continues to be helpful information for you, as you know, we do try our best to get all the answers that we can. But unfortunately, we don't always have all the answers, but we will certainly strive to get you the answers. And if we can't, we'll certainly strive to get changes so that more of you are able to apply for many of these programs. We know we're going into a rough period. Many of you are facing further lockdowns. And so please know that we are constantly thinking about you and trying to do what we can to alleviate it to some degree. So please continue to provide us your input and your feedback and give us a call. We are here to help. So with that, I'm going to wish everybody a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Corinne. Rachel, do you have some final comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I remembered, essentially it has to be paid in respect of that period. So that's something that you have to consider with your eligible expenses. And then again, just a reminder to take a deep breath, and it's okay. You can take your time and just explore the CEWS website, because it does have a lot of really good answers on there. So yeah, I can't emphasize to not forget to breathe. And give us a call if you have any questions or concerns, or send us an email. We're more than happy to help if we can.
Great. And I'll just conclude then by thanking everyone for all your questions and comments. I always feel terrible when we can't answer them all or get to all of them, but let me assure you that we're using them and using them very actively to update our frequently asked questions, and also to get quite more questions into government. This is always a really stressful period when a new program, when the applications for a new program open, because you know there's just more questions than answers sometimes in this short period, but that settles down, and we know that'll settle down as we get clearer on what the gaps are and what the problems are, and also we get answers to some of the questions that are outstanding. So hang in there. We're all in this, and we're working to get you the answers you need. And then I'll just come in behind Rachel and say, yeah, don't forget to breathe. I feel like we've been in this marathon. We're in the last part of the race. The last part of the race can be the hardest. We're all seeing some light at the end of the tunnel, I think, with the vaccines coming and the various announcements there. But it can be where you hit the wall in that last part of the race. So hang in there. We're getting there, and we're here at CFIB to do everything we can to make sure you can finish the race. And with that, I will say goodbye for another week, and we look forward to seeing some of you again next week, and being in touch in other ways. And don't hesitate to contact us if you need us. Thanks very much, everyone. And with that, we'll end the webinar.